Hi, and welcome to the curriculum preview for third grade elementary science. We're going to talk about the second 6 weeks, Unit 2, which is Energy, Force, and Motion. Before we get started, just want to remind you about some key planning documents. Today we're going to talk about the pacing guide. We'll touch just a little bit on the function of the unit overview and then the clarifiers. If you want to pause the video and go ahead and open those up in Forethought, or if you've got them printed out, you might find them helpful for reference. Okay, so we're going to start with the pacing guide. This is a one-page view of the whole unit. In science, this 6 weeks, we only have one unit for the whole 6 weeks, and you can see how it's broken down. We start off with 3.6a, and that's going to be exploring different forms of energy. We've got 5 days planned for that, and we've got that partnered with 3.4a, which is collecting, recording, and analyzing information. And we've got cameras and sound recorders combined with this one. The idea being that students can record with a camera or a sound recorder on any devices that you have for technology in your classroom, examples of some of those different forms of energy. We'll talk a little bit about the details of that one on the next slide. Next, we have a very large part of the unit, 13 days devoted to one single standard. This standard is partnered with 4 different process skills, and so that's one of the reasons why it has such a big chunk of time. It also has a big chunk of time because it's a supporting standard, which is really important for 5th grade STAR. And it's got a lot of context and verbs in there, so we'll take a closer look at that as well. We finish up the 6 weeks with 9 days of 3.6c, where students are going to observe forces such as magnetism and gravity. We've got that partnered with designing some investigations and then looking how repeating those investigations can increase the results, reliability. We've also got partnered here with some spring scales and magnets. So let's talk a little bit about the big points with the pacing guide, and then we'll take a closer look at that very large standard that we just saw in the previous slide. So with 3.6a, we're going to have students explore 4 different forms of energy. As I mentioned, this is partnered with the process skill, where they're going to collect information. Please note that you're introducing mechanical energy to 3rd graders. So that means you're going to want to linger a little bit longer there, provide that information in several different contexts. So informational text, some video examples, some hands-on, so that they really start to understand what this abstract concept is. Last year, just as a note, students explored in 2nd grade what happens when you increase and decrease different amounts of sound, light, and heat energy. So that was really their focus in 2nd grade, so you can kind of take that point and move forward. For the very large part of the unit, 3.6b, students are going to have 2 verbs, demonstrate and observe, but it gets a little bit more complicated when you start to look at the rest of the standard. So they're going to demonstrate and observe position and motion that shows work. And then we have that in 4 different ways. This is partnered with the process skill that focuses on investigation. And then we're going to wrap up with 3.6c, really focusing on forces. And you introduce the concept of a force. If you look back up in 3.6b, it will say position and motion, and really a push and a pull, a change in position and motion, that is a force. So you're really introducing that in 3.6b, and then more formally teaching force in 3.6c. This all being said, it can be a little confusing and a little overwhelming. So my next slide, I hope to break down these last 2 standards in a little bit more detail. Okay, so we're going to take 3.6b and we're going to dissect that out and look at how you might approach that. So as an introduction, maybe perhaps in your Engage, we're going to take the first part of the standard. We're going to talk to students about demonstrating and what that means and observing, and we're going to demonstrate and observe how position and motion can be changed. So just very basically what position is, what motion is, and how those 2 things can be changed. Then we're going to talk about how position and motion can be changed by pushing and pulling. Whatever you use as an example in that first box to show position and motion changing, it was done with a push or a pull. So they already know that, but they may not understand that a push and a pull is what changed the position and motion. So we're kind of adding another layer of information. Then we're going to scaffold another idea that this change in position and motion, which is caused by pushing and pulling, is really the definition for work being done. And this is the very basics of physics. These are the building blocks for physics. You're going to want to linger a little bit longer here so that students really can understand what we mean by work in this particular context. They're, of course, are going to think about when they have to do work at school or if they have to do work for chores and things like that. And this is a little bit different. You actually got the definition for work here if you kind of work backwards. Work is a change in position and motion. It's often caused by pushing and pulling. So we've introduced 3 different layers. Now we're going to talk about the different contexts that we're going to show this in. So we're going to show this work being done by pushing and pulling, which changes position and motion in swings, balls, pulleys, and wagons. So we've taken this one standard and we've really dissected this out, and now you can really see why this would take such a long period of time. Again, we have 13 days devoted for this standard, but it's a super important standard. It's a supporting standard, but it also really vertically aligns all the way up through 8th grade. So it's going to be important that we cover this thoroughly. As we move into the last part of the unit, we're going to add on a couple more things. When you're looking at work being done with the pulleys. The pulleys is going to be something that's going to be a new tool for your students. So you're going to want to take some time and maybe do some mini lessons on what a pulley is, how it works, and you can find those in STEM scopes in the teacher toolbox. And you're going to also want to introduce this tool, which is a spring scale. A spring scale measures force. And in science, we measure force in newtons. So a spring scale is much like the scale that you have in a bathroom, where you step onto the scale and the spring pushes down. Really what that's doing is measuring the force of gravity on your mass. What a spring scale does, uses a spring as well, and whatever you hang from the spring scale, it's going to measure how much that force of gravity, that force is acting on whatever you're hanging from it. So again, there's a standalone lesson that really lays this out exactly what a spring scale is, how it works, and some practice things to use it, as well as the pulley, and that's going to be in STEM scopes in the teacher toolbox. So once your students have spent about 13 days on 3.6b and really have thoroughly looked at all these different contexts, we wrap up the rest of the 6 weeks with 3.6c. And 3.6c is directly related to 3.6b in that pushing and pulling part. So if you'll just focus on 3.6c, it says observe forces such as magnetism and gravity acting on objects. The definition of a force is a push or a pull. So we can come back and spiral back to 3.6b, and we talk to our students about, remember all of those investigations that we did with pushing and pulling. Now let's look at them a little bit more in depth, focusing on magnetism and gravity. Later, they'll talk about friction as another force, but you're going to introduce this concept just with magnets and gravity. And then this is a perfect time for you to use the magnet. So that's a lot of information, and so if you feel a little bit confused or overwhelmed, you can pause the video and go back to it, or when you're ready to plan, just really remember to kind of chunk that and scaffold it, and it really should become a lot easier for your students to grasp those really abstract concepts. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the unit overview. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the tools that are listed for this unit to be used throughout, and I think we've talked about all of those so far. So when you use the unit overview, I just want to remind you of some of the big functions of that document. There are guiding questions, and those really should be used as discussion points for your students, and you can also use those as formative assessments. If your students can answer those guiding questions using the unit vocabulary, they should feel confident that they have really mastered those standards in the unit. There's also a section in the unit overview called Approaches to Classroom Use, and this is where I have some hints and useful tips. So when you introduce a new concept or tool, such as a spring scale, I've got some information in there about where you can find some lessons and a little background information for you. The last part of the unit overview is the resources, and that's where we break down every standard and I list specifically what resources we have to teach that standard in STEM scopes and AIMS and EduSmart, as well as some other supplemental resources there. There's just a couple of notes about the AIMS lessons that are listed. Those are in order of preference or categorized with some notes. And just another reminder that the Teacher Toolbox in STEM Scopes has these great tool cards that I have used as the graphics on here, as well as mini lessons for all the process skills in any tool that you use. Here's just a visual of what I just talked about. So this is a screenshot of all the documents that are in the unit overview. And so you can see the guiding questions on the first page. There's the hints and tips. And then the last part is the Planning for Learning Resources by Teak. The last thing I want to touch on is vocabulary. The vocabulary for each standard can be found on the standard clarifier, and I've highlighted that on the screenshot that you have here. I know many teachers love the picture vocabulary in STEM scopes, but I just want to remind you that it has some but not all the vocabulary for this standard. So always be sure that you check that list on the standard. Sometimes it will have some of the words, all of the words, and then sometimes it'll have some extra words in there that are really not in line with third grade. Okay, so I just want to wrap up and talk to you a little bit about our new additional support that we have for you every 6 weeks called the C3. So if you're watching this video, you have successfully found the curriculum previews in Canvas, and right below where you access this video, you're going to see a graphic that looks just like this, and this is really rolling out our new second level of support for teachers called the C3. And this is just some time set aside after school so that you can meet with your coordinator or colleagues. It's a come and go. It's really a meeting that's driven by you. So whatever needs that you have, whatever questions you have or ideas, if you need some time to plan with your teammates and you want to come and do that with a coordinator just so we're here to answer questions or help you out, we're here for you. It's informal and it's optional. So this is just an extension of the curriculum preview, and we hope that this will be an additional level of support if you need it for your instruction. If you go back into Canvas, you'll see the link for registration in Eduphoria as well as the dates and the times. Thanks so much for joining me, and great and best of luck on this 6 weeks, and let me know how I can support you in any way.